This is what I'm going to talk about today, young adults and religion, and really this is based on research that I've done for a very long time because I'm now on the downhill slope of my career. And to be honest with you, I kind of backdoored into this. I did not ever set out to study young people. I'll tell you more about it, but I want to start with a question. How many of you know a youth pastor who does not have a tattoo?
I don't know. I never asked.
How do you think you would have answered that question 30 years ago?
Right.
It's like that.
Would they have mostly had tattoos or mostly not had tattoos?
Not.
Right. So that's how I got my start in studying young people and religion. So I'll tell you about that in a second, but here's the basic plan. How to think about generations, because I'm really generally dissatisfied with how the whole idea of generations gets talked about in all sorts of different ways, but particularly in terms of religion. I'll tell you what my critique is and then what we can do about it. Then what's the real story about young people and religion? What determines religious outcomes? Like how is it, where do you start and where do you end up? What's the biggest predictor of that? And then what are the implications for faith and faith congregations and faith organizations? So first of all, that book on the left, Gen X Religion. That book started because I had a student and a colleague of mine at USC had the same student when I had her at undergrad. She went to USC for a PhD in sociology. And whenever I'd see Don, he would say to me, "Explain Lori to me." So now Lori was a really, if you, and this is impossible, but let's just imagine that this is possible. If you stripped away everything else about her, if you looked only at her, at how she believed about God and Jesus and the Bible and all that, she was a really good evangelical. She had social conscience, she had all the things, like she took the Bible seriously. But she had this complete alternative body presentation. Lots of tattoos, lots of piercings. At the time, this would have been the late 90s. She was kind of into rockabilly. Bracket that for a second. Her boyfriend, who lived in an apartment with some other young men at this Christian college, one of whom was the son of the founder of Focus on the Family, and they wanted to write a book called Focus on Your Own Damn Family. I will not say more, but there were issues there. But Lori had all these tattoos, and so Don would be like, "What's going on?" So that started us talking about how maybe young people are doing something different with religion. It was more than just in church, but it was across. So that was, we did an edited volume. I literally talked to the publisher, and he said, he liked the idea, and he says, "Can we call it Gen X Religion?" I said, "You can call it anything you want, I don't really care." It was my first book, so it was like, So then that led to a next book, which was, we were seeing these kinds of things where we started with this small idea of, well, it looks like younger people are getting interested in what we like to say in sociology is the smells and the bells. Like the high liturgy churches and that kind of thing, which would be Episcopal, Catholic, Orthodox, broadly. But we ended up with a much broader frame than that. And then, so there's these things are just growing on each other. It wasn't like there was a big plan. And then I was involved in a project called the National Study of Youth and Religion, which ended a few years ago. And we studied young people for 10 years with the same people. They started as adolescents, followed them for 10 years. With a nationally representative survey of them, and then within the survey respondents, we interviewed and it kind of shifted over time, but between 250 and 300 people of the young people that were in that cohort. So essentially, we knew them from when they were 13 to 17 years of age until they were 23 to 28 years of age. Several of them I interviewed 4 times. I probably knew them better than their parents and their friends because we would ask them questions nobody else would ask them. And when they surveyed, the interviews went on for 2, sometimes 3, and then on the rare occasion, a 4-hour interview. And by that time, you're like, oh my gosh. But it was insightful, and it was interesting, and it's fascinating to watch what happened. So there were a lot of other books written in that project, but this one, 2 colleagues of mine and I got together and we thought, wow, what's the role of race in young people's lives? So there was a lot of stuff going on at the time about the role of race versus class in terms of outcomes with young people. We wanted to focus on race and control it, sort of hold it constant. So we're going to sort of say, regardless of that category, does race make a difference? Race matters. It matters in family, it matters in schooling, it matters in religion, it matters in friendships. There are different patterns you can pick up across different racial groups. And then finally, the Back Pocket God book, which we fought with them over the way that phone should face. Yeah. Melinda and I, my co-author and I, we were like, nobody puts that in their back pocket with the face coming out. And our editor says, how I do. I'm like, all right, you win. So that was the last book in the National Study of Youth and Religion. So after 10 years, we looked at all the data, including the last data collection point, and made some conclusions about it. So again, I didn't plan on studying young people, but I did. And the point is, for me, is how does this help me understand how religion is changing in the context of the larger culture? Okay? So there are a lot of arguments you could be made about this, but initially, with Gen X religion, we wanted to make an argument that generation matters. Mm-hmm. And then by the next book, I'm like, oh, that's impossible to judge that. So how do we think about generations? So are generations real things? What's the short answer to that is no. We make them up. And they're socially constructed. We create them to help us think about things. My problem with generations isn't the notion of generations, is how it gets used. So you all know stories that you read in the media that say, pick your generation, doesn't really matter. All millennials are, or all Gen X are, or all whatever. This is who they are. It's like, except for the ones that aren't. So you have to figure out how do you explain the cases that aren't that? Because in reality, people in the same general generation experience the world at key points in their life. They experience the same things. So I'm going to tell you something about myself that I don't normally tell you. I was born in 1956. Isn't that shocking? Shocking to me, that's for sure. Right. But even that comment, okay, boomer, yeah, for sure, there's an assumption underneath it that all baby boomers see the world in the same way. Except that when I was growing up, there were anti-war movements, there were free love movements. I was in a really conservative Christian atmosphere. I was like, oh, these people are crazy. But there were also people going to war. My next door neighbor, I think he's like 4 years older than me, volunteers for the Marines. Whoa. Not only did he volunteer for the Marines, he became a radio operator. But this isn't Vietnam, the height of Vietnam. Yeah. He ends up being a radio operator. He came home on some leave or whatever one time. He says, yeah, apparently, I don't remember the statistic, but it was a really tiny statistic that if you were a radio operator, you were the first one that's going to get killed. In probably the same conversation, he said to me, pardon what I say, this will be a quote. He says, if I ever hear that you're going to sign up for the Marines, I'm going to come and kick your ass. Because he didn't want that to happen. So you have this range of responses to the same thing going on in terms of how people are experiencing these important elements in their life. So the question then is, how do you explain that? So that's what I want to leave you with, and from my perspective, it's really difficult to say generation whatever leads to this. It's easier to say these seem to be common characteristics, and how can we explain the different generational groupings within that? So the anti-war versus the volunteers kind of thing. And that's true any generation. The other thing I'll say about generations is generations go through time together. Your formative period was however old you were when childhood and adolescence, and that forms you in a certain way. And back to okay boomer, like I can never not be a baby boomer. Yeah. I mean, then that forms who I am. Yeah. Plus lots of other stuff, but that life experience of what was going on broadly in the social and cultural context of the US in Southern California, in suburban Southern California sprawl. My parents were, on the one hand, very conservative, and on the other hand, free-range parents. We were out, nobody knew where we were. We'd come home for lunch, maybe, in the summer, and definitely for dinner. But that was it. You were just out doing stuff. Nobody knew where you were, and hopefully you didn't get, hopefully the police didn't know where you were. So here's what I want to introduce. Okay, I want to introduce another concept, and that's the life course. And so in this, the life course, there are periods in the life course through which we all go. A relatively new, so childhood, adolescence, used to be childhood, adolescence, young adult, adult, blah, blah, blah. Now there's, the last 20 years, there's a new category called emerging adulthood. And essentially emerging adulthood is this liminal space where you are, it's kind of like eternal junior high. You're too old for some stuff, you're not old enough for other stuff. It's not exactly right, but it's like that you, and Jeffrey Arnett, who's the guy that kind of coined the phrase, frames it as it's a result of things like larger societal things like birth control, the access to higher education. What happens if you have birth control and access to higher education? You have the ability to delay your family, you get a higher education, you can have a career, and then you have two people that have to negotiate over that, about what that looks like in terms of the family. So your family dynamic changes, your career entry, your workforce entry is delayed. So you have this extended time period. He placed it about 10 years. But even within that, people have different perspectives on where they are. And when we were in that back pocket gov, when we would there was a question we asked them: do you think of yourself as an adult? In the final round, I can't remember if it was in the previous ones. Most of them hedged. Well, you know. And some of them said, oh, absolutely, because I have these responsibilities and these roles. And a lot of that hinges around work and marriage and family, but that's not completely it. So what I want you to think about is, yes, generations do, that common experience helps understand how people think about the world. I think about the world differently than on any number of levels than, say, Najuma thinks about the world. She's younger than me. But there's other things that make us think about the world differently too. So how do we put all those kinds of things together? But at the same time then, I want you to think about that, to me, is the broad context, but then as we move through these different life stages, how does that impact how we think about ourselves, about, in this case, about religious identity and participation, all that kind of stuff. So just briefly, these three books that I wrote, or I'm part of, we divided them up internally in different ways. So the Finding Faith book was, we had four basically types. We started with, we're interested in these people that are going to the liturgical traditions that are primarily from evangelical and charismatic. Almost said a really weird word there. Almost said parasitic. I was not thinking that. Charismatic traditions. And so we ended up with innovators, people who are doing really interesting kind of things within their churches and other organizations that they had founded, but without giving up who they were as young Christians. Appropriators, who do you think that is? What's the big group out there that is really good at appropriating the larger culture and turning it into something that thousands of people come to? Is megachurches. And I'm convinced that every megachurch, or maybe there's a source of it, has cultural scouts. I've never met them, but I think they're kind of out there checking on what's the thing, and it gets brought into the church, baptized in a way, and given back to the members so that it's kind of this relevant is often the word I hear, movement. There were resistors, and the resistors were the ones that were really concerned. Really, these were older people who were concerned with younger people, and so they tried to kind of copy the innovative stuff, which didn't exactly come off in a great way, but they had a following. And then reclaimers, and the reclaimers were the place where we started, which were they want to go back and reclaim a tradition that they never had, Orthodox Church, whatever, and all the stuff that goes that goes with that. But there's other things going on in all of this. So I'll give you one quote from that book that I always remember, because I remember, I remember the interview with him. He was a Orthodox preach, convert from Presbyterian church, had the big beard, the robes. And his quote, and if I'm remembering this correctly, it's in the book, because as soon as he said it, I'm like, oh, that's going in that book, I'll figure it out, was, orthodoxy is a bastion of patriarchy and a sea of egalitarianism. So there's something there that's appealing to people, and we can see it, there's a through line, we can see it in some of the developments that we're starting to hear about today, where I started to read these media articles about how people are doing this same sort of thing and acting like it's new. It's like, no, it's not new. It's been going on for 30, 40 years, and probably longer. So with growing up in America, it was about what differences race make in these different sorts of things. In terms of religion, there are significant differences. And I remember having an argument with somebody who wanted to argue without reading the book that we were wrong, because one of our lines is that white kids are the most entitled. And he's like, I wouldn't call it entitled. And he started arguing with me. I'm like, well, maybe you should read the book and then we can have a conversation and see how we're using it, which he never did. But and then finally, the Back Pocket God Book, and I'm going to move on. I'm going to be a couple minutes over. I don't know where you went, but sorry about that. The story that most people hear about religion in general in America, and particularly about young people, is decline, right? You all know that story. You know the numbers. And it's true, but there's other stories. So one is liminality. It's like either in or out. But there are way stations that you can identify that might be their last foot in the church, say, before they leave, and others that maybe that's where they, and we don't know, because we haven't pursued this further. And then finally, there's a smaller group that is strengthening. So over time, they're getting stronger in their faith. And as one of the books from the National Study of Youth and Religion said, they're making their faith their own. So they're actively engaged with their faith to make it their own faith. They haven't left. They're not in between. They're staying in there for a variety of ways. I'm not going to tell you all of this, but you can read the book. There are different trajectories of where do you start and where do you end. The top line is the we called it high stable. It's like these are the people that grew up in church and stayed there generally for whatever. The bottom line is low declining, and then the dotted one in the middle is sort of a steep decline. And so if you look at the two ends, so low declining and this high stable, the high stable people stay in the faith. I'll tell you why in a minute. I'll ask you a question about it first. The low declining just sort of leave. It's not like, we had a lot of people ask us, why are people leaving religion? Why are people leaving churches? And they want to identify a thing that pushes them out. Generally, it's just, my life is busy. So there are some that have specific reasons, like gender issues, gender identity issues, politics, whatever. Those are real things. But the bigger kind of thing that we picked up through the interviews with people was like, this doesn't do anything for me. There's nothing there for me. And that, I think, is a bigger problem for people of faith and faith leaders than, we can identify this problem and solve it, which is, I think, what most people want to know. So that just kind of gives you the trajectories. This table, if you look in, I can't read that to you. Actually, I can. So the top, so basically, if you're high stable, you attend, where you begin when you were a teenager. Attend church once a week, faith is very important, prays about once a day. Where they end up, attends church once a week, faith is extremely important, prays about once a day. The steep decline, attends church once a week is where they start. Faith is very important, pray a few times a week. So that's kind of involved. Where they end up, never attends church, faith is not important at all, pray a few times a year. And you have to ask yourself what they mean when they say pray.
Yeah. Right.
That's a measure that most people present as, oh, look, young people are so interested in religion. It's like, oh, are they? What are they praying about? Who are they praying to? Because it's different probably partly on within the generations, probably partly on who they are. Two people, one a committed Christian, one not religious person. One says, "Oh yeah, when I'm driving from Southern California, when I'm driving my car around, sometimes I throw a prayer out for somebody I know." So there's no discipline to a spiritual life. It's like, yeah. The other one says, "Well, do you pray?" Yeah, I pray. What is it? What does it sound like? What do you pray about? And he goes, "Well, I don't. It's not really prayer, but I call it prayer. Sometimes I pray to my grandparents." So it's a processing of something to somebody else, but it's not necessarily to God, whatever God is for them, because I'm not showing you this, but there is this thing, I need to do something about this. Do you believe in God? Yes, no. Then within the percentage of young people that believe in God, there is a category that unfortunately was not asked in the first 3 waves of data collection for this. Gives all the typical traditional kinds of responses to how they might view God as a personal God, as a force or whatever. This one category has 20% of our respondents. It was none of those. I want to know. I haven't had time to do it, but it's like I want to know what that means. The best predictor of the different trajectories, and this would go if you're not religious or you are religious. What's your family life? How involved is it around religion? How involved is it around religious practice in terms of going and the kinds of conversations you have? This is true for atheist kids too. What are you socialized into? There's a great book by Vern Bengtson, and it's in, if you find that workbook that we had with the Reimagining Church, there's a series of books at the end. There's a book by Vern Bengtson on passing on the faith. He found that, among other things, that religious and not religious homes pass on, quote, the faith in similar kinds of ways. Chris Smith and a couple different colleagues have written 2 books on religious parenting. You should look at those. So basically those 3 things at the bottom, parents that are invested in their kids' religious lives, they're not just saying, you should go to church because it's good for your values. They accompany them, they talk about it, they do all these things. They attend services together as a family, and religion is part of their daily life. Praying, reading scripture, all these kinds of things. Now, just a few things to leave this is that, to me, this is what I've seen over 25, 30 years. In that Finding Faith book, we heard people say, I moved into this tradition because it had a longer history, more tradition than what I heard of growing up in my non-traditional, low churchy kind of evangelical, charismatic kind of church. So the authority was external to the individual, which made sense to us. The project we finished in 2017, the language had completely flipped, which was, it's my story, my truth, my personal choice. Everything's good. You can believe whatever you want. That's fine. I'm not going to judge you, but this is that. So there's this curating a personal identity where personal identity is the most important. So for me, for this book, we argue that there's basically 4 choices, but there's probably a lot of choices within those 4 choices. First was you just keep doing what you're doing and hope for the best. That may or may not work. I don't know. My guess is not. Second is wholesale change. By wholesale change, we're saying there is a possibility you could change into something completely different, like not even be Christian anymore. But you could, in fact, we're starting to see that in some of these more nationalist Christian movements. They're marginally Christian now. They have Christian language, but theologically, they're really kind of shallow. That would be a good word for that. But anyway. 3 and 4 are related. So be reimagining the congregation, the community. Like, how do you be together as a church community? How do you be together in the context of the community you serve? And maybe even 4, develop new forms. I think those easily go together. I mean, if you think of these social enterprises, for example, that are functionally like a church because people are together because of how they believe and how they believe that God wants them to act in society. They may not They may not do churchy things like sing and whatever, but they are functionally operating as a church with a high degree of involvement in communities. So I would encourage you to think about what you're doing. Think about the kinds of ways that you can, how do you adjust what you're doing? How do you take it into account to attract young people? And there's going to be, and again, this is the problem with the whole generations thing, is there's a lot of variation sitting in this room. Some of you are really successful with young people. Some of you are like, I don't know what to do. But how do you figure that out? And you know, we say this all the time, you know your context. You need to figure out what's the context there, what might work better than something else. It might be having a straight up, really high worshipy sort of thing, but it might just be going out and helping homeless people. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then all of that, the bottom one, all of that relates to theology and culture in significant ways. And I want to share this song with you. This song I was going to put on, it's the first few lyrics to this song. I wanted to put that as the epigram for the Back Pocket God book. But then it was going to be too expensive because people want to make money off of their artistic thing. So it's just fine. But this is from Fleet Foxes. And so it struck me as really interesting given what we were working on at the time. These are the first few lines of the song. I was raised up believing that I was somehow unique, like a snowflake distinct among snowflakes, unique in every way you can see. But now after some thinking, I think I'd rather be a functioning cog in some great machinery serving something beyond me. Now, the interesting part to me about that is the rest of the lyrics, if I can read them. A few verses down it says, if I know only one thing, it's that everything that I see of the world outside is so inconceivable, often I can barely speak. So to me, I'm reading this as there is a desire, to the extent that a song is illustrative of anything other than that individual, that there's something going on there. They're looking for meaning in life in ways that they don't find available in the broader culture. But then if you know the song, it's like it's going one way, and then it has this coda, and then it's a whole different sounding song. And he sings, if I had an orchard, like trees, I'd work till I'm raw. If I had an orchard, I'd work till I'm sore. And you, his presumed partner, would wait tables and soon run the store. So he's imagining this kind of interesting traditional setting where it's small, it's community organized or oriented, but there's a way to create meaning out of that. And to me, it's like, how do you as faith leaders create that sort of thing where there is a reason for people to show up, there's a reason for them to continue to be there, there's a reason for them to go out and help other people to pursue their spiritual lives and that. And how does attracting young people into that. The last thing I'll say is, and I'm sorry it's going to kill me, is that in every project that I've done with young people, there is a through line about they want to be connected with older people. Whether that's their parents. In Back Pocket God, we asked them, I don't think we said heroes, but essentially that kind of, who are the people you look up to? Not everybody, but the majority, my parents. My grandparents. So there is a connection they want to make that the larger culture kind of downplays in certain sorts of ways. So how do you do that? How do you make, within your context, those things available to people?